Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, former Timberwolves. They're all, at least recent former Timberwolves, are done playing in the playoffs. Let's recap what they did with their teams this year, what the Wolves were missing out on throughout the regular season and playoffs from a bevy of recent former Wolves. It's all upcoming to the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. Enter the promo code LockedOnNBA. They'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. And a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find this show. You can also watch, along with all the other Locked On Minnesota podcasts, on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Just download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. More great local sports coverage 24/7 for free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Of course, you can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at my account, which is at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right, so today on the show, we're going to do a little bit of, I don't know, I guess not really reminiscing, but reminiscing about players who used to be on the Timberwolves, and by used to, I mean like within the last year, and recently were eliminated from the playoffs. Actually in every, well, not quite in every case. In almost every case, we're part of playoff teams. But of course, with the Lakers being knocked out now, we could talk D'Lo, we could talk Malik Beasley, we could talk Jarred Vanderbilt. So lots of former Timberwolves to discuss today. I want to talk about like what their seasons look like away from the Wolves, what their contract situation is, et cetera. I just think it's pretty interesting. And it also gives us a little bit more, not in every case, but more context for some of the trades that were made, I guess, especially in the case of the D'Lo trade. So we're going to start there. But there's actually 6 former Wolves I want to talk about today. We'll spend most of our time on, I guess, 4 of them. Of course, Kevin Love and the Miami Heat still playing. Like there's some other former Wolves out there, but we're going to focus on the guys who were recent Timberwolves. Actually, all of these guys were on the team last year. So there you go. They're all players that were jettisoned or allowed to leave by Tim Connelly. So we'll start with the current Lakers. D'Angelo Russell, I think, is a good place to start. And I'm not going to be able to give a full blow-by-blow of his Lakers career. I talked to the Kamenetsky brothers back prior to the Wolves play-in, right before that play-in loss to the Lakers. I did that crossover episode with the Kamenetsky brothers who host Locked On Lakers. Of course, have covered the Lakers for a very, very long time, written books, the whole thing. They do a great job. And they were, I don't want to say glowing in their praise for D'Angelo Russell, but talking about he was everything that they, had been looking for and expected. And, you go back and look at what he did in the regular season, and he was injured a little bit, banged up a little bit there, kind of typical D'Lo stuff, sore knee, all that stuff. But he played well in the regular season. I mean, he shot in 17 regular season games, shot 41% for 3. He was competitive defensively, and they noted that. He basically was a lot like what he was with the Wolves, just maybe a little bit more consistent, a little bit of a better shooter. Nothing really that was a surprise, but what the Lakers were looking for was a secondary playmaker and really a secondary scorer beyond LeBron James. And I guess secondary backcourt scorer in that regard. Obviously, you still have Anthony Davis, but somebody who could play, make, and score, kind of bring that combination, right? Because the best version of D'Lo is an off-ball player who can, who can create, but he's not your primary offensive option. And to that end, the role with the Lakers is actually not a bad one. Wasn't a bad one, and I understand the logic why the Lakers wanted to bring him in. In the playoffs, though, things slowly fell apart for D'Angelo Russell. He really kind of got phased out in the playoffs by the Lakers, and he was basically a non. He lost his prime rotation spot as the playoffs went on. He played at every game. He actually didn't start the game 4 loss when the Lakers were swept to the Nuggets. He started every other playoff game, but like first series, he's averaging, 30 plus points per game. They beat Memphis in, 6 games. And then in the second round, his minutes stayed strong. He played well against the Warriors, but not quite as good as he did against Memphis. And then in the Denver series, he shot 4 of 11 in the first game, scored only 8 points. It was the third game in the playoffs he'd scored in single digits. And then the next game, he only played, I guess he still played 32 minutes in the second game. He scored 10 points. Game 3 was when it felt like everything turned for D'Lo. He only played 20 minutes, shot 1 of 8, 1 of 6 from 3, had 3 turnovers to only 4 assists. And then he didn't even start in game 4, played less than 15 minutes in that game. And the Lakers were swept. You compare his playoff statistics, like if we just want to do it this way, to what he did last year for Minnesota. Remember, and I don't probably need to remind you if you're a Timberwolves fan, that D'Angelo Russell was essentially benched late in the series against Memphis as a member of the Timberwolves because of his play, and Jordan McLaughlin played instead of him. So, I mean, like you could compare, like in that 6-game series, Wolves Grizzlies last year, D'Lo averaged 12 points and 6.7 assists per game. This year, with the Lakers, I mean, that's pretty in line with what he averaged overall for the playoffs. So I thought I had it here, and then I lost it. Let's see. For the playoffs this year with the Lakers, 13.3 points, 4.6 assists. Last year for the Wolves, 12 points, 6.7 assists in that one series. The shooting splits, though, are kind of the thing with D'Lo, right? If he's shooting the ball really well, D'Lo's a good player. He could be a plus player for you because it generally means he's probably competing defensively, he's engaged, etc. Last year in that first round series with the Wolves, he shot 33% from the field. He was 38.7% from 3, but the volume was relatively low. This year in the playoffs, 42.6% overall, 31% for 3. That's, again, for the playoffs. In the 4 games of the Denver series, though, he was 32% from the field, 13% from 3, which is like 2 of 15, I think. 2 for 15. He was 13% from 3 in that series. So he saw his minutes, and the minutes, by the way, did dip in the Warriors series compared to where they were in the Memphis series, and he didn't play quite as well. So it was kind of a slow, like he was 31% from 3 in that Warriors series after shooting 37% from 3 against Memphis, averaging 17 a game. Like he was fine in the Memphis series. But all that to say, Lakers fans saw very quickly, D'Lo giveth and D'Lo taketh away. Now, I think many of them would still welcome him back. I'm speaking in broad strokes, obviously. There was a lot of exit interview talk from the Lakers camp. If you go and look at some of those interviews where they were talking about having D'Lo back and all that. Of course, the LeBron question is the big one. Obviously, him kind of, I guess, threatening is not the right word, openly wondering about the possibility of retirement. That's got to get figured out before you know what you're doing with D'Lo. But he's an unrestricted free agent. Like somebody's going to pay D'Angelo Russell. And as I say all the time on the show, when it comes to free agency and trades, all it takes is one, right? All it takes is one team that says he could be our second star and average 25 a game. I guarantee you there's a team out there that believes that about D'Angelo Russell. It might be the Lakers, but the Lakers saw up close and personal how D'Lo can give and D'Lo can take away. And I don't think that this like unequivocally says like, well, I don't know. I guess I would say this unequivocally myself. This is more a matter of opinion, but I like the Conley trade was obviously a good one for the Wolves, right? I mean, like don't even consider the Nickeil Alexander-Walker factor. And the Wolves played better with Mike Conley on the floor than they did this season with D'Angelo Russell on the floor. And now you have Mike Conley next year at, whatever it was, low 20s, 22, 23 million. And like, that's better. Like knowing you have that versus the question of what do we have to pay D'Angelo Russell? And again, in a vacuum, you could make the argument D'Lo is still the better player than Mike Conley. Like if you're just comparing the two as players, factoring in their age and what they're able to do offensively at this stage. But Mike Conley is unequivocally the better fit for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Factor in the contract, factor in the question of what happens with D'Lo's contract this summer. The Wolves know what they have in Mike Conley at what price for next season, and especially what he showed in Minnesota. He was better with the Wolves this year than he was with Utah. So whether it was being revitalized by being in a legit playoff contention spot, the personnel being back with Rudy Gobert, I don't know. But Mike Conley is a better fit for the Wolves than D'Angelo Russell. And then you factor in Nickeil Alexander-Walker, what he did defensively on Jamal Murray, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the playoffs and the play-in, respectively. Of course, he's a restricted free agent. We don't know for sure if he'll be back. I think it's pretty I should say that. We talked about this on another show. I don't want to get into that now. He may or may not be back. But I think that clearly was a smart trade by Tim Connelly and a really, really savvy in-season move. But all that to say, D'Angelo Russell's season ended in a disappointing way, and I'm very curious to see what happens to him on the open market this summer. All right, let's talk about another pair of Lakers, Malik Beasley, Jarred Vanderbilt. We'll also get to some of the other members of the Gobert trade that went to Utah initially later in the show, and also Josh Okogie, old friend Josh Okogie, who left in free agency last summer and ended up starting for the Phoenix Suns in the playoffs. So we'll talk about all those guys here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs are extremely comfortable pants and shorts, and there's no question. I just simply look better, and I feel way better with the comfortability of wearing Bird Dogs. I actually had never worn them transparently until last week, and I can't stop wearing them. Honestly, like the stretchy fabric that they have not only makes my legs look great, but it absolutely is just comfortable in every way, shape, or form. I think the best way to put this is I could wear them hanging out in the backyard, grilling with my family, and then if I forget something, I have to run to the store, I can wear them to the store comfortably, not have to change it because they have pockets, but they feel like you're wearing basketball shorts. They're just they're even more comfortable than that, but they have functional pockets and allow you to really do anything while you're wearing them. They're about as versatile as you could find in a pair of shorts. So Bird Dogs for the win. Absolutely. If you're looking for a comfy pair of versatile shorts or pants, really, but for the summer shorts or pants when you get, I guess pants in Minnesota, right? Like you wear pants in the summer sometimes. Pants or shorts at Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. When you enter the promo code LockedOnNBA, they will throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every single order. Again, that's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. Promo code LockedOnNBA. You get a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. Going back further in terms of Wolves transactions over the last year, obviously D'Lo was part of that trade deadline transaction, but the Rudy Gobert trade over the summer with the Utah Jazz also sent out a pair of players who were then later traded to the Lakers in Malik Beasley and Jarred Vanderbilt. Also included in that trade, Leandro Balmaro, Patrick Beverly. We'll briefly talk about them today as well. But let's start with Beasley and Vando because those guys played in the playoffs for the Los Angeles Lakers. However, Malik Beasley in particular fell out of favor. He played in the first, actually every game in the Memphis series, not much. Like he averaged basically like 12 minutes a game in that series. And then he did not play in the first game against the Warriors, ended up only appearing in 4 of the 6 games in the series win over Golden State, was not a rotation player at all. And then in the Denver series, only appeared once for less than a minute in game 3, did not play in 3 of the 4 games against the Nuggets. So Malik Beasley was completely removed from the rotation, and he was a big part of the rotation after joining the Lakers. In fact, right after the trade, he was a regular starter for a period of time, had a couple of big games in the starting lineup for them, had a 7-3 game in a win on the road against the Pelicans. He was removed from the starting lineup shortly thereafter, still was a rotation player, pretty regularly played minutes. I think it mostly depended on matchups. Lonnie Walker played a similar role for the Lakers and ultimately really took his spot in the rotation in the playoffs. And Malik just couldn't stay on the floor in the playoffs for them. And I don't think he played poorly in general with them. It's just Malik Beasley is still Malik Beasley in that, like, what does he do for you? He makes threes and he doesn't really play defense. So that's always kind of been the knock on Malik Beasley. Overall in the playoffs, he shot 27% from 3. In the regular season for them, in 26 games, 14 starts, he was only 35.3% from 3. So a disappointing overall shooting season for Malik Beasley. With the Wolves, the year prior, he was 38%. His first year in Minnesota, first full year, he was 40%, 39.9% from 3. Remember, he averaged 19.6 points per game in the initial COVID shortened season, or I guess it was technically the second. So the 72 game season, remember he had the legal issues, et cetera, and only played in 37 games, but he was 40% for 3. He also had the hamstring issue. And then the next year, last year with Minnesota, he was 37.7%. And like we had the whole conversation on the show, like, is he better cast as a starter or, a 6-man type? And the answer is he's better cast as a starter because he's never going to be one of your top 3 options, but his role is run the floor, be that guy to catch and shoot, and be one of the best catch and shoot transition guys in the entire league. But if you're an absolute, just a terrible defender and you don't give anything else offensively, then it's hard to justify starting a player like that. And that's kind of the weird in between where Malik Beasley lives. The Lakers have an option. I think it's a pretty pricey one. I think it's like $16 million on him for next year. I'd be a little surprised if he's back because of that. Remember the contract he signed with the Wolves, which was after the COVID shortened season, was like, it was 4 years, like $60 million. And then this next year, it is $16.5 million team option. He was paid $15.5 this year. So I'd be surprised if he's back with the Lakers. The Wolves still need help on perimeter defense. Like, this is a conversation when we get closer to free agency. If Malik Beasley's out there, I don't know. I mean, like, the Wolves need some shooting, and I know he only shot 36% this year, but he's a career 38% three-point shooter. He shot, 39% in a Wolves uniform over parts of 3 seasons. I think Malik Beasley is a name to consider. It's too bad. I feel bad that he fell out of the rotation there. But, he had a nice season in Utah, too. So, disappointing end to the season for Malik Beasley. Jarred Vanderbilt, on the other hand, will be in LA next year because he still has a bargain of a contract. He saw his minutes decrease as the playoffs went on, but he was a big part of that first round win over Memphis. He even scored 15 points, had a 15.6 rebound, 3-block game in a game, kind of really a decisive Game 4 victory that put the Lakers up 3-1 against the Grizzlies. Vando obviously matches up much better against a team like the Memphis Grizzlies, who's rugged in the paint, good front court players. Like, that's a big series for Vando. He was phased out a little against Golden State, and again, matchup thing. Same thing with Denver. He actually did not play in the Game 4 loss. The only playoff game he didn't play, and he got a DNP CD, was that Game 4 playoff loss. But he saw his minutes kind of wane as the playoffs went on. He only scored 6 points over 3 games, and actually only grabbed 4 rebounds over 3 games that he appeared in against the Nuggets in the conference finals. That said, obviously, again, with the Lakers, everything depends on LeBron James and his offseason, what he's going to do. But Vando is a great fit for almost any team because of his energy, his versatility on defense, the fact he can rebound. The offensive limitations have to be considered when it comes to what his minutes look like where you're plugging him into the rotation. But Vando is a capable rotation guy. I think, and I've said this before, I think he's not a starter on a playoff team, and he started for most of the playoffs, by the way, in the 15 playoff games, or I guess 15 playoff games he appeared in. He started 13 of them for the Lakers. I don't think he's best cast as a starter. It depends on the team makeup, but I think he's a fringe rotation guy on a legit playoff team. I don't think there's any question about that because of his defensive chops, his versatility, his rebounding ability. And he's like, I get why the Wolves included him in the trade. I'm sure the Jazz wanted him, and he's got a great contract. I don't know that he fits great with Rudy Gobert. And so, like, to that end, he's maybe not a great fit with the Wolves anymore, but he's also the type of player in terms of the way he plays, that grit that he plays with. The Wolves missed that a lot this season from both him and Patrick Beverly, who we'll get to in a minute. And so to see him have success with another team, good for Vando. That success should have been with Minnesota. It's tough. But I also, again, from an on-court basketball perspective, the Vando Gobert front court may not have worked all that well. So, I completely understand the move. All right, let's close the show here today by looking at, 3 other former Wolves. 2 of them were included in that Gobert trade, and then we'll also talk about Josh Okogie. So that's how we'll close the show here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs for that $1,000 no-sweat first bet. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. I mean, right now is a good time to get in some bets for the finals. Of course, the Eastern Conference finals still ongoing with the Celtics win on Tuesday night. But I mean, talk about a fun finals. Denver and very likely Miami at this point, obviously. To me, that's a fun series to bet on. And I would give a slight edge to Denver right now. I don't know what the actual odds are at FanDuel, but go check them out and consider placing your finals bet now. It's a ton of fun. Whether you go series long bet or individual games or individual game over-unders, it's going to be a ton of fun to bet that over at FanDuel. There's no better place To bet all the playoff action, all the finals action that America's #1 sportsbook, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's close the show by talking about a couple other old friends, actually 3 additional old friends that were dealt. Well, 2 of the 3 were dealt in the Rudy Gobert trade. One, Leandro Balmaro, of course, during the season, he was actually bought out by the Jazz, and he is now playing overseas. I lost what team he's on now, but he signed overseas. He only appeared in 14 games for Utah, played a little in the G League, and just was never able to latch on at the NBA level. Now, of course, he's still only, 20? He's not even 23 years old yet. Balmaro still has NBA talent. Obviously, the biggest issue was the shooting. And we saw that in the G League too. Like, he just was never able to consistently shoot the ball from 3. And then the other thing is, Balmaro, part of his main calling card is supposed to be his size and playmaking ability plus, size, athleticism, and defense. And he never really seemed consistent enough on the defensive end of the floor, either NBA or G League. And that was kind of the thing. At his size, the question, he's athletic. The question was, at his size, would he be athletic enough and switchable enough to stay in front of guys at the NBA level? And we never really saw that. Certainly not in his limited time. The Wolves started him for that short stretch back in like November, year before last. And it seemed like the defensive chops were relatively limited at that level. Again, at the time as a 21-year-old, a pretty young 21-year-old. So there's a lot of other factors. If Balmaro wants to come back to the NBA, I'm sure he'll have the opportunity to do that because, again, the size, the skill level with the ball in his hands. And with the Iowa Wolves last year, he really struggled in 11 games. He shot 27% from 3, 43% for the field, struggled defensively there too. With Utah this year in 7 games in the G League with the Salt Lake G team, he did shoot 38% from 3, 48% from the field. The numbers look a little bit better there than they did in Minnesota. So perhaps something is clicking. We'll see how he does overseas. But obviously, Balmaro was a first-round pick just a few years ago by the Wolves. So we'll see how he does and if he does get back to the NBA or not. The other player involved, of course, in that Gobert trade that went to Utah was Patrick Beverly. Of course, he never played for the Jazz. He was then bought out, signed with the Lakers, and had a bit of a rocky 45 games with LA before he was bought out there and went to the Chicago Bulls. I'm sorry, he was traded from the Jazz to Lakers, not bought out. Traded from the Jazz to Lakers, then bought out, signed with the Bulls midseason. There was all that chatter. He was basically talking about how he wanted to go to Minnesota. The Wolves would have needed to create a roster spot to do that. In hindsight, I don't know. What could it have hurt if you let Austin Rivers go and you signed Patrick Beverly? Anyway, this year, though, for Pat Bev, he showed some clear signs of maybe wearing down a little bit. Of course, he's an often injured player. He's never played in more than 71 games in a season. Played in only 58 games for the Wolves last year. He did play in 67 this year, which is the most he's played in since, I guess he did play in 78 games in his second year at the Clippers back in 18-19. But he's banged up a lot. He obviously, with the way he plays, kind of all out, I guess, not kind of all out. He plays all out in your face, a strong defender. He's going to get worn down a bit quicker, and he showed signs of that this year. He shot only 33.5% for 3, which was easily a career worst, on the heels of last year when he shot 34.3%, which was easily a career worst last year with the Wolves. So over the last 2 seasons, in 125 games, Pat Bev shot under 34% from 3. Before that, for his career, before last season, coming to Minnesota, he was a career, Career 38.2% three-point shooter. So he's more than 4 points worse over the last 2 years from beyond the arc. That really matters, especially when he doesn't do much else offensively. The other problem he had this year is he didn't get into the paint at all. Last year at the Wolves, he actually drew a ton of fouls. He was aggressive with mismatches. We saw that in the playoffs when he was trying to attack John Morant. Like, he was willing to do that. Now, he wasn't being asked to do that as much with LA, but this year the free throw rate dipped precipitously. And it really kind of hampered his offensive effectiveness because he was, getting to the line less, and he was shooting threes a lot at a much worse clip. His offensive effectiveness completely goes away. And defensively, he was good still this year, but again, showed some signs of slippage. I still think he's he can play a role on a playoff team. He's a clear backup at this point, even though he started all year for both the Lakers and Bulls. And he started for the Wolves too, right? Like the majority of the time, we didn't think he'd be a starter when he joined Minnesota. He ended up starting for the Wolves. And, we talked a little bit in the Jordan McLaughlin, actually a couple times already this year. Is Jordan McLaughlin back? He's got a low, he's only owed like $2.8 million next year. Or would they move on from that? I think it's still likely he's back. If Pat Bev wants to come back to Minnesota, there's probably a team out there that's willing to actually pay him. But if we're talking, if he's getting closer to the vet minimum stage, perhaps Minnesota brings him in and him and Jordan McLaughlin kind of share that hybrid backup point guard role. That's a possibility. Pat Bev is slowing down a little bit, but he's still only going to be 35 next year. He turns 35 this summer. So I think there's still a world in which Patrick Beverly does come back to Minnesota. All right, let's close the show with Josh Okogie. Okogie, of course, last offseason was a restricted free agent. The Wolves declined to tender him an offer and let him leave in free agency. That wasn't a surprise because he was a first-round pick. So if they had tried to do that, he would have been expensive to keep coming off of that. And sure enough, nobody else was going to tender him an offer as a restricted free agent. So he ended up signing essentially a minimum deal with the Phoenix Suns. Started the year as kind of a fringe rotation guy. Like he wasn't a completely out of the rotation player, but he was only playing a handful of minutes a game. Like, for instance, in his first 6 games last season, he played less than 2 minutes 4 times, but he appeared in the first 6 games for the Suns. He slowly saw his role increase and then saw some spot starts kind of in and out of the rotation again midseason, then became a regular starter in early February and started the rest of the way in the regular season. Did not start at all in the Clippers series. That was more of a matchup thing than anything else, but then started the first 5 games of the Denver series, did not play at all in the game 6 blowout loss for the Suns to Denver, but became a regular starter and an absolute rotation mainstay for the Suns. And remember with the Wolves, his last year in Minnesota, there's a few games that stand out. There was a West Coast road trip. I think it was actually the Warriors and the Clippers who just completely didn't guard Josh Okogie and were shadowing Towns and Anthony Edwards and making Josh Okogie shoot threes. I mean, that still was the case at times with Phoenix, and they had even more personnel to kind of combat that because they had so many dynamic one-on-one scorers. But Okogie had his career best shooting season this year. He shot 33.5% for 3, which is passable if you're going to be as good as he is defensively. He also shot a bunch from the corners. He shot 32% from the corners, and nearly half of his 3-point attempts were from the corners. And that was something we talked about last year with the Wolves, but he only shot 18% on corner threes in a Wolves uniform last season. So that is the biggest thing, is he just simply got better at shooting threes this year. He was a little bit of a better rebounder in a Phoenix uniform. I think they probably said to him, like, hey man, if you're going to play, you got to crash the glass. You got to get us some boards. He did all that much better. He was a really good fit for what Phoenix does. And it was clearly his best season in the NBA. He was not an absolute minus on offense. He was fine. He did what he needed to do. For him to end up starting for a Phoenix Suns team that went to the second round of the playoffs, obviously the Suns had higher expectations. They ended up firing their coach after the year, but they won 45 regular season games. They went to the second round. I mean, Josh Okogie has reproven himself as a potential rotation guy in the NBA. Now he's a free agent. He can go anywhere. I think he's going to see something more than the minimum this year, because there's going to be the team that says, hey, we need a guy that's going to go out there and play breakneck defense and, not kill us on offense. And I think he's now shown he can do that. Nobody's going to give him a massive commitment in terms of salary or dollars or years, but I think he finds a team that wants him in the rotation and pays him more than the minimum. So good on Josh for having such a great season. I don't know that he's a fit in Minnesota. I think Alexander Walker is a little bit of a better fit than Okogie. If they were the same, like if you had to pay Alexander Walker twice what you're paying Josh Okogie, let's talk about it again, because Okogie might be the better option. If all things are equal, I'd take Alexander Walker. I do think Okogie's a little bit of a better defender, but I think there's a lot more offensive upside with Alexander Walker. So it's not like, I'm not saying the Wolves are choosing between the two, but they play a similar role. You're not going to have both on the same team. If Alexander Walker gets too expensive, Okogie could be a fallback. But I think Alexander Walker still is a better fit for the Wolves roster. All right, plenty more free agency talk to come. Of course, we're still daily Monday through Friday, so we'll be back the next couple of days this week. And we'll also get into some draft stuff here soon, too. The Wolves do have a second-round pick, so I think it's important to look at some draft prospects. We're nearing draft season, so stay tuned for all that coming up here soon. That's all we got for you today. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.